Good morning.
Good morning, Khan sir.
Good morning, Professor Khan. How are you?
Good morning, sir.
Very, very good. Hi, Professor Dandavate.
Good morning.
Grateful that you took time to, address us, and really happy that you also read about Jamia and and this whole your article about Tehzeeb and how you connected design, Tehzeeb, and Jamia culture together was amazing. It was a very, very nice read.
Thank you. Well, I spent a lot of time in Delhi, so Jamia is a part of the ethos I grew up in. And I just wanted to basically make sure that every institution should have its own framing, like a philosophical framing on how it brings a unique perspective to the world. And Jamia has such a unique contribution to the society going back to so many decades, 100 years, right?
Yes, yes.
So it cannot just have a design school with very universal kind of ethos. It has to have its own ethos and its own contribution. So I can clearly see that. Also, I've lived in Lucknow, so I've experienced what tehzeeb means in action also.
Very nice. So we actually were born out of freedom struggle when we were,
Yep.
part of the freedom struggle, and then we reinvented ourselves very nicely
Mhm.
later when we achieved the target of
Mhm.
the Gandhi's vision of how India should be, and then we embraced the modernity and taking, we are rooted very, very deeply in the earlier
Mhm.
ethos, and then we are very modern in our outlook. So modern that in 1920, when we started, we are, we always thought of women and taught them together with men. So this probably was, one of the unique experiments when from nursery onward to PhD, we have
Mhm.
co-education. And so men and women learn things together, do things together, all take part of all cultural activity after school hours and all. The other thing, we are very rooted to the, to the idea of, understanding thing by doing it.
Mhm.
And so this whole idea of experiment was to do things and learn.
Yep.
So, and initially when we started with, very unique program like rural engineering. And so that people can go in villages and work. So I'm really proud of this institution, and also proud of the fact that it reinvented, it started its, modern engineering college, mass communication research center. This, the oldest, one of the oldest, education institution is also here, and it also reinvented itself to very, very modern needs which are there. So I welcome Professor Dandavate, and it's indeed a great pleasure in welcoming him. He's a very renowned name in the field of design. So on behalf of Department of Design and Innovation and Jamia Millia Islamia, I welcome him here. I also take this opportunity to welcome all the students, faculty, and attendees from other departments and organizations. As I gather, we have a student from MDes program of IIT Delhi, research scholars from IIT BHU, apart from our own student from Jamia Islamia. DDI was established with a vision to provide a very versatile education and outreach to budding designers. The emphasis of this program, as conceptualized in Jamia, is to provide education through experiential learning. And as one part of this experiential learning is to interact with designers and people who have been able to create mark in the designers fraternity and have contributed positively to solve the continuously rising challenges in social, economic, and environmental areas through their sustainable design innovations. In today's time, field of design is ever expanding. It has become so versatile that and so interdisciplinary that it is difficult to imagine any area, any phase, any activity of mankind. In fact, I should be gender neutral and say any living kind where designer don't have interventions. Design program at DDI is conceptualized with this belief and aim to create graduates who understand and are able to see the interconnection between apparently disparate or diverse subjects and are capable of applying the acquired knowledge in problem solving for building inclusive, sustainable communities. In this foray, I'm confident that today's talk with our stalwart proponent in the field of design, Professor Uday Dandavate, will go a long way in establishing a meaningful construct and background for those aspiring students and will enable them to indulge in intellectual appreciation and develop right attitude to extrinsically decipher the existing complexities in and around our environment and consequently provide conscious design solution for the same. Though Professor Dandavate don't need any introduction, but it will indeed be a pleasure for me to take few moments to speak a few lines about him. Professor Uday Dandavate has a double graduation in design, industrial design from NID Ahmedabad, and user research design from Ohio University. Though he is a design advocate and proponent of social imagination, he enjoys experiencing different geographies and communities across the globe and uses his experience to have imagination that can have purposeful effect in creating livable societies. As I understand, he is involved in a variety of projects varying from social design to healthcare design to futuristic machine design, and he has worked with many of the Fortune 500 companies. I'm sure that today's deliberation will provide very meaningful insight to our students, further realizing the limitation of time. I welcome Professor Uday Dandavate again on behalf of Jamia Millia and request Professor Jatin Bhatt to give a brief introduction about today's discourse. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Khan.
Thank you.
It is always a pleasure to connect and converse with Uday. Uday and I go back more than 45 years, I think. And I have admired his journey and his achievements through these years. Let me start by quoting late Dashrath Patel, Padma Shri Professor Dashrath Patel, who was one of the founders of NID, as I think it in many ways captures what I feel about Uday. And I quote, "Design lives on peripheries of life. If you don't know life, how can you design?" He personifies this as he has been a curious student of life. He is interested in everything about life, cultures, behavior, habits, relationships, beliefs, faith, as well as politics are all that he pursues closely. He is curious, childlike, and a perpetual explorer of everything that concerns life and lived experiences. He connects to people with ease and genuine warmth. He is apt at managing conversations, questions, confusions, conflicting ideas, and disagreements as they provide him with the urge to enhance his understanding about the world we live. He has been a passionate crusader for design and its larger potential in all spheres of human endeavors. There is much about his views and deeper insights that you can find from his writings available, and I'll not delve into them now. To conclude, let me quote Buckminster Fuller, and I quote, I live on the earth at present and I do not know who I am. I know that I am not a thing, a noun. I seem to be a verb, an evolutionary process, an integral function of the universe. Over to you, Uday.
So the history of design in India, we've kind of witnessed it, been imbibed with some great thinkers, like he talked about Dashrath, he talked about Buckminster Fuller, who also came to NID while we were there. And what it created in us was curiosity for life, not design as just a workshop for building products, but design as a way of thinking about life. So, in that context, I do want today's conversation to be a conversation and not just a one-way presentation by me. Also, in the most recent past, I have stopped showing visuals as a part of my conversations about design, and I like to have a dialogue as a way of creating an image of possibilities in your imagination. So, my hope is that today's conversation will create an imagination of the future opportunities students have, an imagination of the world that we all, the professionals, the teachers, and the students of design can create, co-create. And from that perspective, I have one question for anybody from this audience. Do you have any question for me? Anything about your concerns about design, about your practice, about your future? It could be anything. Yeah, Sumer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Sumer. I work as an assistant professor in Department of Design, IIT Delhi.
Mhm.
So uh, I studied design some 20 years before, when it was considered as a very niche uh, or unexplored domain.
Started thinking about when we started thinking about design when we were in school as students. That time we were very socially driven. For us, design was solving social problems. They were in that industry and society were not two separate entities. In that high tech versus crafts were not separate entities. They were all a part of human endeavor in creating the world that we live in. As the time passed and what you see today, design has undergone changes in India and around the world. I'll first talk about India and then I'll talk about around the world to answer your question. So my short question to you is, yes, design is exploding in terms of its market for job opportunities for graduates, but design is moving at a different pace in different directions, and which pathway you want to take might decide what kind of opportunities you take. The direction that has really been growing within India is tied more to the embodied part of design, something that the end product of design is seen as a product, a brand, a service, or a vision for a company. A lot of corporates, big sectors, medium sectors have been sponsoring it. I do know that a lot of my friends from NID and many other design schools are doing great work in social sector, in the craft sector also. But what I'm seeing emerging, so in that space, there are going to be huge opportunities because more and more people understand that to make a better quality of life, you need design. But another area which is really growing, and that's where I see Jamia playing a big part, is changing organizations, changing institutions, changing the society in ways that embraces new way of thinking, new and emerging cultures, new and emerging technologies, and thinking of it not as a way in which to affect the product outputs, but the way, and from that perspective, I see Jamia playing a big role at the intersection of social sciences and design as it's traditionally practiced. And I'll talk more about that as we move forward. But I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, so very, very wisely answered. Thank you.
That was Dr. Ekta Singh. Uh, I just went through all your three links which you have shared with us, and it was actually it's overwhelming to see that you have been able to frame your opinion, mindset in last 2-3 years because of this pandemic, how your thought process have changed with respect to the immediate environment that we have around you. The expression design has become a very comprehensive word in everybody's mind space today. In India, if I look into last couple of years, in last 2-3 years only, the field of design has started emerging like anything. All the institutes, whether it's government, it's private, it's a kind of a ray that everybody has started opening up this department. One thing which concerns me a lot is about that most of the India resides in the rural areas. I don't see much of the efforts with respect to the design interventions in bringing up or making the life of the people living in this area are really meaningful, really purposeful with respect to their own growth. So I would like you to ponder or to throw some wisdom of yours on this.
I would agree with you that a lot of fresh graduates are looking for industry jobs. They are taking up industry jobs and they're serving industries. But I do know several people, including Jatin has done work with people in with artisans and in rural areas. I know other people who are working with empowering women, craftsmen. So I would, with the way I would address your question is that if you treat design not as something that a designer does for a client or for consumers, but design as a way of shaping the imagination of people to design for themselves and to create institutional infrastructure that helps them make that a way of living, in which case what design can do is it can actually play out in communities, whether they are rural, whether they are urban, or whether they are urban poor versus rural poor. With the local skills, you can actually make a living. When we were at NID, there was a Jawaja project in Rajasthan. Some of you may have heard about Bunker Roy's Barefoot College that he has been working with in Rajasthan. These are the people who have actually taken to helping rural areas, villages to tap into their own innate skills and creating a way of building designs that are in alignment with what the market requires or what people require to live life of quality. So from that perspective, I would say Jamia Millia, just like during our time at NID, it was a requirement to go out and work in rural areas, get exposed to the lifestyle in rural areas. I think design is going to spread everywhere, and designers who are interested in serving as catalysts of design, participatory design that happens within communities, will have more influence in the future in all areas of life.
Absolutely right, sir. I think that is what Professor Khan has mentioned, that this department is envisioned more with the belief of learning with experience, and I'm sure that he must have worked that out.
You did refer to the pandemic as a time where I had moments of rethinking about design, about my own life, and about how I contribute through my years of practice to the world. And one thing that I realized is that as designers, we have to preserve our direct connection with people and not just see us as a community of professionals serving a community of clients who pay us. the relationship between a designer, a client, and people at large is evolving. It's changing in a way that, in my interpretation, new interpretation of design, I participate directly in social imagination, in understanding how people think, the kind of life they want to live, what are the things that are exciting them, what are the things that are bothering them. And then through my creative capacities, get them to think creatively about their own life, and then bring the knowledge of how people think about the future to the clients and say, I am the interpreter of the social imagination. I am the interpreter of the change, the positive change that's happening in the world. I am the facilitator and an intermediary between the world that is beginning to become and the tools that you have to participate in that world, that future. And therefore, more and more, I'm beginning to see that as I assume my position as a translator of how the world is changing for my companies, I have more influence and more power beyond my old relationships with the clients. And therefore, I kind of have begun to believe that I am uh, the new champion of social imagination in our client companies. So having said that, um, I wanted to say something interesting. During this period, during the pandemic, I also discovered that everything that I have learned over the last 5 decades of studying and practicing design suddenly one night translated into I writing poems. Uh, I published 2 books during this period, during these last 2 years. I didn't know, I'd never written poems. So I went back to one of my design teachers from NID Times, and he said something very interesting. He recited a share which was written by Allama Iqbal, and I'm going to read that for you. It says, हजारों साल नरगिस अपनी बेनुरी पे रोती है, बड़ी मुश्किल से होता है चमन में दीदावर पैदा. The interpretation of that poem, as he explained to me, is your design sensitivities that were created over over all 5 decades of pursuing your curiosity, of learning from your environment, was nurturing a bud inside you. It was ready to bloom, but it hadn't bloomed. But just when the pandemic happened, it was just enough exposure, just enough absorption with all your designerly sensitivity to the environment that the bud was ready to bloom, and that's when your attention fell on it. So my inner sensitivities were the bud, and my attention was the deedawar who paid attention to it. And what the learning I have from that is, as designers, we owe it to ourselves for our own professional growth, for our own responsibilities to the society, to open our minds, to become curious, to absorb what exists around us, and then inculcate this sensitivity, the designerly sensitivity that is throughout your life, and at some point in a more profound way going to turn into a way in which you would contribute to the society in ways that you've never thought of. And that's what happened to me. Any questions till now? So I want to say something else. So I have believed, go ahead, Sumer.
No, it's fine, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So we are all, I think I have developed a philosophy of design that I want to share with you. I have learned through all these engagements with people, real people around the world for the past, especially for the last 25 years, I've been a design researcher. I've traveled around the world to almost 50 countries, talked to thousands of people about their life, their dreams, about what affects their lives, what are their challenges in life. And through all that, I've learned, and more so during the pandemic, I had the time to reflect that I think the most important thing for us to recognize is that we are all a part of nature. No matter where you go, which part of the world, no matter what your ethnicity, no matter what your religion, no matter what your beliefs, no matter what your color, we are all a part of a design of nature in which diversity is the essence of the nature. Nothing is the same in nature, but that diversity is the essence of creativity. But at the same time, we are all connected. The sky, the land, the water, the trees, the birds, the humans, we are all connected. We all support each other in life. And therefore, what we give comes back. Whether we give a nourishing power to the world and it comes back to us, or we give hatred and it comes back to us. So therefore, we need to be mindful of the fact that whatever we design, whatever we create, whatever we inspire, we need to be mindful of this connectedness that we all have. One day it all consumes us all. It might be good, it might be a great idea, it might be a bad idea, it might be joy, it might be sorrow, it might be hatred, it might be love. So nature built us and created this connectedness so that we could care for and support each other in hour of need. We have seen during the pandemic that as much as there was a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of people understood what it means to support each other. People came out of the woodworks to support others. People realized that somebody who got sick in China, somebody who got sick in Italy could bring that sickness to India, could bring that sickness to America. We realized that we need to handle health as a global issue, as a universal issue, not as a professional practice that serves a patient and doctor relationship. So in this kind of a process, in this connected world, in this connected life, my question and my unique lens to what you guys as at Jamia can do is, what is the new culture that's relevant to creating a design of the future? And three words come to my mind: humility, mutual respect, and elegance. I see these as essence of design that Jamia can breed. And that's what is the essence of Tehzeeb that I have experienced. So how do we create a new practice of design that actually helps people be humble, tap into people's mutual respect and cooperation, and still create outputs that are elegant? In this, with this new mindset, we are going to see some big changes in the field of design. In the past, when Jatin and I went to design school, we had to specialize in product design, graphic design, packaging design, ceramic design, environmental design, and later on in systems design. Today, times have changed. Life has become more complex. The whole world of internet has come in. Digitization has changed our life. And now we have new professions of information design, user experience design, human computer interaction, systems design, service design. All of these have taken the domain of design from object to interactions between information, between people and information, and people and machines. So, so the group that is coming out of schools today, they're going to find jobs in these areas. But I see a new future emerging. And that's something that you have to be prepared for. Just like when we went to NID, we were motivated through our readings and our interactions and our, coffee shop conversations and conversations over bhajia and bonda and all of those, for a future that was not going to give us gainful employment in the near future. But I see that future emerging now. And that future, and that's what I have been practicing now. I'm beginning to practice that now in my profession, in my practice. At one level, you would be dealing with organizational cognition, which means getting organizations to think the way the world thinks, bringing them alignment with how people think outside the world. Also challenging the beliefs of organizations about who they are, how people perceive them, what their new opportunities are, how the world is changing. A lot of times I have seen designers have tools and methods in which we can begin to affect how organizations think. So that is organizations cognition. The other thing that is going to be the future of design profession is ritual design. We have a history of thousands of years. We are connected to our traditions, we are connected to our crafts, we are connected to our beliefs, our superstitions, and our religions. And through all of those myths and mythologies and superstitions have emerged rituals that we follow when a child is born, when we get married, when we name a child, when we die. All of those have rituals. But today, in the world where the world is changing, the communities are becoming multicultural. People are getting married across cultures. Technology has entered our world. Urbanization has affected us. Through all of those, we have to open our minds to new ways of doing rituals that are modern, they're contemporary, but yet meaningful. So designing those rituals that stay for the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years, but their essence is grounded in the new realities, the new ways of diverse multicultural world is going to be another opportunity. Can you imagine? One of my friends here was working on a ritual, designing a ritual for sending off a family member who died remotely during pandemic, whom the family could never see. So the only connection to them was between their phone and iPad. So what kind of a ritual that is memorable, that's meaningful, that could happen from that setting? He was working on that. So you never know what kind of challenges and opportunities we might create, but we want to create rituals that will live in a new multicultural modern world. Community design. As I said before, design doesn't happen by a designer designing for a company or an institution or for a specific group of people. Today, design is a community effort. A group of people who understand each other, who care for each other, who have capacity to produce products within that community, have to learn to live and produce and design for themselves. How can a designer participate in a community of people? And that's where one of your questions comes. How can you adopt a town? Can you adopt a community of craftsmen? Can you adopt a city or a certain group of people and empower them with a new way of creating value for the community through products, services, and communication? So another area for future is culture design. We are seeing a lot of cultural conflicts in the world today. They are carried forward by the old beliefs we have. They are carried forward by the old conflicts we have had, old biases we have, old self-image we have, self-identity we have. Can we create a new culture in which people can live harmoniously with each other, respect each other? What kind of a culture can an organization have to facilitate harmonious living, and creative and valuable way of continuously creating value for the people who support and who live in that. And finally, the idea of social imagination design is going to be a part of designers, where we understand, we participate with people, we sense their sensibilities, we sense their ethos, we sense their culture, we sense their aspirations, and create narratives and stories that can inspire everybody around the world, everybody around your community, everybody around your country to think of a future that's positive, that's inclusive, that's constructive, and that inspires people to think about the future with creativity. And I think that's the kind of area where you are going to participate. You're not just going to be employed as designers, you might be employed as a journalist, you might be employed as at a United Nations company, organization, you might be working with a rural development project, you might be working for a new technology such as autonomous cars. But in all of those areas, what you are going to be having to think about is how do you create a new narrative of the future that builds a vision for everybody to work with. So that's my kind of a quick um, overview of my vision of how design is evolving. Please feel free to ask me any questions. Are there any
Hello.
students? Oh, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So I'm Jatin. So you said about culture design. So we know like about India. So we have religions and they have conflicts. So how will you design a way, or how will you go about designing so that they can live harmoniously?
I can say I can say there are ways in which people can actually, as much as there are conflicts, I still have the hope, and I have seen where people come out to support each other. As much as there is, and worldwide, there are tensions happening on issues of identity. It's not just in India. It happens. And so I think what creative communities, designers have a role to play in is we need to understand, we need to create events. We need to create ways of interacting where people can actually come together and enjoy something that's not driven by a conflict, but by a desire to be together. I can tell you one picture that I found extremely powerful in the media is yesterday I saw a picture in media where girls in Karnataka were holding hands and going to the school, regardless of the controversies going on there. And they said it doesn't matter what the school says, what the government says, we are friends, we're going to go to school together. No, that's a ritual that they created themselves. They rose above whatever controversies are going on, and they said, we are in it together. We are here to study. And we are not, we don't really care. We do care, actually, we do care for each other. And therefore, that image, I would say it is a design image that is so powerful that it has touched many hearts. Any other questions?
We, as a student of design, we have felt many times, and also as a professional, that there is a gap between the design vision and the design, the final statement of design that we get as an output. So is there a way, or it is just a kind of metaphor which people have been using, or it's just a kind of false imagination of a student that what he is visioning and what he is actually producing in the end is exactly what he has thought of initially?
So are you just talking in terms of a design as in a visualization of a product that you had in mind and what goes to the market? Or is it more about difference between ideology and what you practice?
Yeah.
Which part are you more referring to?
So it is basically this later part which I'm talking about.
So the design ideology and the actual practice, that's what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, that is the design as a vision and design as an action.
Okay. So I can tell you one thing that when we went to NID, I would say we were groomed in ideology of design more than practice of design, especially the earlier batches, rather than the craft of design. Though we did learn craft of design, I think we were excited and inspired by the design ideology that came from around the world, where we cultivated curiosity and enthusiasm for changing the world for better at a grassroots level. And then, of course, we went into the profession and we started serving our clients, and we began to see the same gap between our ideology and what we're being paid for. And that's what you're referring to also. But I can say it takes a long time for a profession to take roots. In that time, it can take a wrong turn or a narrow turn, but it it takes a lot of belief in what you have learned to be persistent in putting out the values that you cherish, that you have learned in design school. And I would say in my 45 years since I was at NID, it is only in last 3 to 5 years that I can feel that I have come closer to practicing what I believed in, the ideology or the design discourse that I was talking about. But what helped me get to that point was the belief and the conversations and the dialogues and the mobilization and the communities that I was building. And I think that's what we do. What we have to do is, design is not just the stuff we build. Design is the conversations that we have, the relationships that we have, the beliefs that we propagate, ideals that we propagate. And in a world where things are moving more towards disintegration and hatred, a designer can actually bring what I talked about, the spirit of Tehzeeb, which is humility, mutual respect, and elegance. And I think you can bring it in every way by being the change that you want to see in the world. I don't know if I answered your question, but that has been my experience.
So that is very true what you have said right now. In the last statement, which you said, we have been all, yes, sir.
No, I can be honest that I have myself felt frustrated that sometimes I worked on projects because I need to make a living and I want to be more impactful, more influential on the design ideologies that I have inculcated. But you just keep at it and you just form communities of people and you keep propagating that idea out into the world, and someday it catches on. And I think we are right now in a world where the message of unity, the message of interdependence, the message of diversity needs to be appreciated. It seems to be on a losing side, but as long as there are people like us who see creativity as a means of inculcating those values, someday things will turn around.
Also linking again to your article which you have written during the pandemic about the pandemic has taught us that how to create the solutions which are more local in nature, looking into how the pandemic has influenced our outreach to the outward environment. We all were confined to small houses, flats and apartments. So that is also an opportunity how we can use the design solution to vouch for that locality around us. So,
I totally agree with you. In fact, I think we have to be designers at different levels, and we have to apply design talent at every level. One is, you are a designer in your job where you're making money. You are a designer in your neighborhood where you're helping build a community that supports each other. And you are a designer in the world where you are propagating and promoting ideas, putting it out in the real world where you never know where it goes. But then what you put out comes back. And when it gains momentum, it gains its own place in the world. So at each of those levels, you can begin to contribute that.
Mhm. Professor Lalit is there. I would request Professor Lalit, sir, please, if you have anything which you.
Well, I'm sorry I joined late and somehow slipped my mind. And but the points that Uday is making are very, very relevant. And number one, that interdependence, symbiosis, all these things are important. Okay? And we have to appreciate that some of these values are not given by human beings to human beings. It is very much part of the ecological system in which we have evolved. And once we appreciate that, then the conflicts will cease. Otherwise, we say these values have been given by such and such prophet, and this has been given by such and such prophet, and then now there's debate among human beings. So, and the other point which Uday is making is that we design at different levels. Design is very much like love. When you are designing, you are loving people, you are loving material, you're loving processes, you're loving a civilization. Like love is between brothers and sisters, mother and child, between a boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife. So love takes many different forms. And I think this is what we have to appreciate, that design also takes many, many different forms. And we as designers have to adapt ourselves for different situations. So it's wonderful. Uday, what you are saying is wonderful. And I hope this becomes part of our overall thinking. Because my feeling is that sustainability and circular economy will be the in thing, and in the next 10 years, we'll be redesigning everything, all products, services, and industries. It has already started happening in the advanced countries, and it will happen all over the world. So thank you, Uday, for...
And thank you, Lalit. It's so nice to see you after so many years. Yeah. Is there any student who has any questions? Because you are the guys who have to take this forward.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Kshitiz here.
Hi.
Sir, thank you very much for this very insightful talk that you are giving us. Like it is giving us so many points to really think and ponder upon. Sir, my question is more specifically towards this fact that, you said that humility amongst the three facets are very important that a designer should inculcate himself. So I want to know about your anecdotal story, that how you found this thing while you were practicing in the design world. I'm asking you a question very specifically because I came from an advertising, from an advertising background, and I work only like 1.5 years there. So while I was working there, I was working with people who were the stalwarts. Like they were the people that that any client could say that that they would be able to bring such creative insights. But one thing that I found very, lacking in them, that you know, they weren't that much humble towards their clients. Maybe एक होता है ना कि पीछे आप उनके गाली वाली भी दे दे रहे हैं. And maybe they weren't also like, but the thing is that, when you talk about humbleness and humility, so in what aspects are we talking about? I want to know your anecdote regarding this.
That's a fantastic question, and I will give you anecdotal information. So when I studied at NID, I was trained to become product designer. When I practiced product design, I was first in Lucknow, then in Mumbai, then in Delhi. My ideals were design catalogs from around the world and celebrity designers, just like you talk about in advertising. So I wanted to be a celebrity designer. I wanted my products to be housed in Modern Art Museum in New York. And then as I traveled, I went to design conferences outside of India. I looked at all the literature, design magazines from around the world, and I started feeding this craving in me to leave behind a signature product, a signature image of me. And then as I traveled more, I realized I wasn't good enough compared to some of the designers around the world. So I decided to go back to school. So I came to the US because I wanted to be as good a designer as anybody else in the world. So I applied in different countries, got admission to school in the US, and accidentally, instead of becoming a better designer, I became a design researcher. And my teachers came from the background of psychology, anthropology, sociology, and communications. And that's when I also started interning in a design office called Fitch. And I started going into people's homes and started seeing how products were being used by people. What made a home feel like a home? And I realized that people's homes didn't look like the homes I saw in design catalogs. They were messy. They had their own organizing principles. They had the kind of pictures on the wall that designers would laugh at, mock about. They would have colors on the wall that designer would say he's an idiot. And suddenly I began to wonder, why do people live in environments that they create for themselves and find comfort in it, find a feeling of home in it? And I began to think, oh my God, maybe I was pursuing something that doesn't make sense to people. I was telling people this is right design, but people are telling me this is what means to me. And that's where my designerly ego started getting challenged and subdued. And over a period of time, I came in contact with an advisor and who later was my boss, and then my business partner. She taught me the idea of participatory design that came from Scandinavia, where you basically get people to design the experience they want for themselves. And products are only a small part of what people build for themselves, the life they build for themselves, the meaning they build for themselves. So if somebody wants, uh, you know, um, an icon of a religious icon or something that came from their traditions, or a chair that came from some ancient culture, it's not just because of its ergonomics or beauty or style that they're bringing it in, because it means a lot more to them. And that's where I began to start seeking a different role as a designer. And that's when I found that people design for themselves. Design never begins with designers. It never ends with designers. Design begins with social imageries, the things that people as collectively want to aspire. And then designers just produce products to feed into that imagery. And then people take it and they rearrange it, they destroy it, they modify it and make it fit their own environment. So if you really want to be a true designer, you have to be a part of the discourse that shapes people's imagination of the future that could be, the future that would bring peace to them, harmony to them, joy to them. Participate in that through
Hello.
writing, poetry, whatever that might be.
बोलिए.
Oh no, so basically, so my answer to your question, Kshitij, is that we all were trained as designers to be heroes, to seek recognition as I am the creative guy. But when you suddenly embrace the idea that we are not the only ones who design, but we have the idea, we are a member in the chorus of life. So if we sing out of tune, the music will go out of tune, but we can't control the whole music. We just have to align with others and play the right tunes. Did I answer your question, Kshitij?
I'll think and ponder on this thing. But
yeah, that's a fair answer. And it's not easy. I think because I think designers' biggest challenge is to contain our ego.
Exactly, sir.
And design schools actually nurture ego. The clientele nurtures ego, because they want to brand your talent as a hero's talent, but actually to have a real impact on the real world, you can serve yourself better as just somebody working under the radar than as a hero.
If I may add something to it, Uday.
Yeah.
See, partly it's the fault of our design education, especially in India.
Mm-hmm.
And we are Anome Kana Raja. And so we are made to believe that we are something very, very special. And my education in design happened somewhere else. And there I was immersed in an environment where I had fabulous designers around me, and an environment which had fabulous design in it. And we were never given that feeling that we have to be very special. We are there to address problems. And that's it.
Yep.
So I think there is a need to inculcate this humility and confidence. So confidence is essential. That's part of the education, but humility at the same time.
Yeah, and confidence and cockiness are different.
Yeah. So you have to be very confident in solving the problem, in addressing problem. And that is why the word empathy has been brought in now to get rid of that cockiness and feeling of being very special.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why empathy is important.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lalit.
I have to go.
Any other comments?
My own experience working with, typically, we have a relationship of a hierarchy when we work with lesser people in sense of how we imagine themselves to be. Crafts or crafts people are considered to be the ones who do not know, and designers are supposed to go and provide all these solutions. My experience has been completely different. I have actually been able to respond to them more by listening to them, and they have a very strong understanding, opinion, and position. And more often than not, my ideas actually get shaped not because I thought about it, because they are the ones who are actually giving me the right perspective as to how I could go about it. And that's where, I changed my way of, my approach altogether. And it's like what you say, it's through spirit of collaboration, co-creation, that you work together. And that's where you have to work at an equal level and respect the fact that as much as you believe, artisans or practitioners of any, skill or craft, or knowledge have their own experiential insights and, understanding of where they come from. And that has as much of a value, especially when you consider tacit knowledge, which is not explicit, all the more reason in it to have actually that kind of respect and humility when you work with such people.
So I would absolutely, to that point, no matter which job you get,
yeah,
build your community, not just within the organization you work for, but outside of that organization, through direct action, through writing, through dialogues, through all of these methods. And your network is your power, not your job.
In fact, let me also tell you, I think my experiences when I set up this department at NIFT, a lot of issues that concern the department, the solution did not come from us or the faculty or the students. They came from people who were working as support staff. So I would ask my attendant or my assistant, this is an issue. How do you think this needs to be addressed? And they actually will have a clearer understanding of what's happening and have a better, more effective ways of reworking and approaching an issue rather than the way we look at it. So even in organizations, everybody matters.
And the truth is that when you build a community that cares for each other, they have deep knowledge of each other.
Yeah.
And that knowledge knowledge doesn't come from just interviewing somebody or just knowing. If you know one person, that doesn't necessarily mean you know the other person.
Right.
And that's what large corporations do, is like they design for common minimum denominator, whereas what communities do is they design for every specific individual.
It's like dal in every household would be tasting differently, though it may be a Punjabi dal or a Gujarati dal, but every household has a signature taste.
Absolutely. Any other comments, questions?
Good morning, sir.
Good,
Yeah.
Prakriti, go ahead.
Prakriti.
Sir, my question to you was basically, sir, sir, in this field, what is the biggest challenge that you think there is at moment, and what critical changes what we should make to like face the future effectively?
That's a great question. Now, give me a second to think, because yours is a great question, and I don't want to just like instantly give a. So the real challenge. Now, I don't want to generalize, because every place has its own challenges. I can tell you what challenges I feel, and then maybe you can, or others on this call can say what challenges they feel. And then I can talk about what the opportunities are. I think the biggest challenge people have in organizations that I work with, number one is they don't talk to each other. Number two, their beliefs are held on to very tightly, and they don't see the obvious signs of change that are around them. And number three, they're so obsessed with the singular purpose of making money that they don't understand there are other ways than just making money that needs to be done in order for them to even make money. So they're only narrowly focused on the small silo they're sitting in. They're only thinking about how to entice people into buying what they make. And they are not willing to see the change that needs to be embraced by them, even if that means becoming a different company with a different cause, different purpose, and catering to a different set of requirements from the market. And I think that kind of a mental block is the biggest challenge I see. And it takes me, I'm not kidding, it takes me anywhere between 6 to 10 years to bring about even a noticeable change in the way my client company thinks. And the worst part is, by then those people change their jobs.
Yes, sir.
So what ends up happening is you build relationships with people through their 3 or 5 jobs, and then you build a community of design thinkers and design practitioners who actually support the cause you are championing. So kind of the world is far behind the life people, everyday people want to live. You mean the industry is far behind? They're so obsessed with their beliefs and their the things that give them a kick that they just don't have the time, the attention, and the resources invested to do the right thing. So those are the challenges I face. And those might be totally different from the challenges you might face.
I would just like to add to what you right now said. I feel that we are designing more for complexities and rather than for simplicity.
So are you saying we should be designing for complexities, or we should be taking complexity and making it simple, or taking simple things and make it complex?
It's very contradictory. It's very controversial, in fact, I should say, and very conflicting
that's fine.
in
You
nature.
can say whatever you want.
It's very conflicting. But what I feel, sir, that as a designer, somehow during the initial years, this is what you also said, that what we indulge into is teaching the the budding students to design more with a complex solution rather than with a simple solution. So that is what I have been facing, not I should say facing, observing for last 2-3 years, that the intention of every student or a designer is more to have a product or to have an output which stands out differently from the others. So that is what they indulge in, making more things more complex rather than looking more towards having a solutions which are simple in nature. They don't require any amount of that convergences which we end up doing in a simple product. So that is one kind of pattern which or paradigm which I have been seeing for last 2-3 years, especially among the student fraternity.
Okay, I like what you're saying, and I want to build on what you said. So I have experienced something similar, not among students, but even amongst practitioners, that it's also a part of that arrogant attitude. Because some people have the tools to think complex, they like to make things complex. But and then there's another attitude that people have, especially the technology sector, is to like have disruptive innovation. That's a very popular term. And what's the idea? Take an existing business model, take an existing way of using products or services, and bring about a new way of doing it, so that the existing business models are replaced, existing products are replaced, existing companies are replaced by new ones. And in that process, you start from a startup to a big company and make a ton of money. So that's like a new mindset emerging, even where I work, San Francisco. I recently wrote an article in LinkedIn where I say disruptive innovation is a myth. Number one, very few people are actually able to disrupt. And what you need is not disruption. What you need is, you need to respect that life is complex. You need to understand the complexity. But as designers, our job are threefold. Number one, simplify. Number two, improve. And number three, leapfrog. And leapfrog means when you know that certain group of people are ready to do something beyond what they need to continue doing, help them, give them the tools to do it that way. Which means, okay, if people want to, say, use driverless cars, or people want to not get married, just live together. Yeah, there are these different at a technology level, social level, cultural level. If people want to start moving back, in America, there was a trend like where people were moving back with their parents, or people want to work remotely, like after pandemic. Some of these things that people are embracing new behaviors, and you don't want to see how you change the current structure. You just want to think about, if these are the new behaviors, how do you restructure the current structures to embrace the new behaviors? So that is leapfrogging. So the leapfrogging either caused by new mindsets, new technologies, new values, new dreams that new generation has, and a lot of it is embraced by a new generation. So we need to actually pay attention to those emerging futures that are emerging regardless of what engineers do, and then rearrange everything around that. And that's not disruption, that is leapfrogging. And therefore, my response to your comment is, as designers, instead of aspiring to disrupt everything, we should simplify things, improve things, and leapfrog times.
That is a very wonderful connectivity which you have set right now. I'll request Professor Jatin to please give vote of thanks.
I have a couple of questions.
Definitely.
They are all pertaining to my experiences with you as students. And the second one is a much larger question. The first question is, I think in your writing, you mentioned that you quoted Einstein, that none of the discoveries he made were done through a rational process. Now, in that context, what is the value of a process in design? That question one. Number two, what are the imaginations for new organizations, especially education organizations, and how do we manage to have organizations which actually are robust in terms of the beliefs, convictions, values that are sustained, and what drives the sustenance?
Good question. So I will address your first question, and if I forget the second one, you'll have to remind me again.
Okay.
So the first question was about the Einstein's quote. So I can tell you from my own experience, between my education at NID and my education at Ohio State, I learned more rigorous methods and tools of thinking, of collecting insights, organizing them, and finding patterns and making sense of them. So more rigor you bring to your thinking, more your capacity to absorb available information is. What that does is it allows you to influence both your rational thinking and your subconscious. As you learn more about the complexity of life or about any complexity of anything you're studying, you also realize that rational connections don't exist between all the things that need to be considered. Sometimes there is no answer to a question, so you have to keep the question pending in your mind until the answer emerges. So you cannot assume that rational and structured process will produce answers always. But human mind is also one where when you rest, it starts working. When you're sleeping, your mind starts connecting the dots. How many of us, including Einstein and Archimedes and Newton, have woken up with an epiphany saying, oh my God, now it makes sense. And that didn't come through the rational process, but the rigor of rational process created a restlessness in their mind. They collected enough dots so that the dot connecting process happened both through structured process and through subconscious process. So that's my answer. You need to bring more rigor and systematicity to collecting the dots, but you need to sometimes rest and let the subconscious do the dot connection also.
So robust process is very crucial to create conditions for potential for intuition.
Yes. And I don't know if I just call it intuition, because that
Or
could
insights,
be construed by some people who don't buy into it. But I do believe it's a neurological fact that our brain keeps making connections.
Yeah. So basically connecting what appear to be unconnected.
Yes.
Which is what actually brings about the new imagination.
Correct. So if I address your first question, I'll go to the second question. Can you repeat it if you don't mind, please?
I just say, what is your imagination of organizations of the future? Education organizations.
Okay. What is my imagination of the educational organization of the future? I would say a number of smaller educational initiatives that focus more on cultivating human minds, their ideas, ideologies, values, as being relevant to the environment they can actually immerse themselves in. Institutes of who want to control everything nationally, internationally, globally.
Thank you very much, Uday. I think it's been a great conversation. I hope students had asked more questions, but maybe we'll find some other opportunity and a platform to connect with you in future. Well, thank you, Ekta, for coordinating this, and thank you all for participation. I think it's been a wonderful session. And Uday, good night, and see you soon.
Thank you, and Khuda Hafiz.
Yeah, Khuda Hafiz.